Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Marika Luneau to talk about Gen Z. Marika, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, as we're beginning, I was hoping you could share your superhero origin story. That is to say, how did you get started working in the nonprofit world?
That is a great question. I got started in the nonprofit world very unintentionally. I was working at a co-working space and we had some fellowships, so basically complimentary memberships to nonprofits that were mission aligned. And I kind of just started to become friends with some of the nonprofit leaders in the community. And I started filling in the gaps where they needed help, specifically on social media, creating some of their websites, very basic landing pages, and then hosting some of their fundraising events and community building events.
And today, well, how would you define or how would you explain to people what you do today?
As for my nonprofit involvement, I'm still volunteering very heavily. I still do nonprofit events, nonprofit community building, and some LinkedIn management. Professionally, I do LinkedIn management and personal branding for nonprofit leaders, freelancers, and consultants who are serving nonprofits and other purpose-driven professionals. So it's more so nonprofit adjacent than directly working for one specific nonprofit.
That's cool. Obviously, not everybody we speak with is directly involved, but the idea is that there's a lot you can. Well, I'm looking forward to asking you and sharing with you about Gen Z. I'm curious to know, though, if we can begin with a what is a so Gen Z? What are we talking about in terms of age ranges today?
What is the age range of Gen Z?
Yeah.
That is a great question. I don't know. I'm 23 and I'm Gen Z. I know that much. And I have a sister who's 17 and I think she's also Gen Z. So I think the spectrum is maybe like 15-year-olds to 25-year-olds, something in that range.
I'm actually doing a quick Google search as we speak. So prior to Gen Z were Gen Y or millennials, and they were born from 77 to 95. And then Gen Z is between 96 and 2015.
Oh, that is a wider range than
It
I
is.
even realized. So 10-year-olds are Gen Z.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. When I talk about Gen Z, I'm usually talking about recent college graduates or current students, maybe even some high schoolers. I'm not referring to 10-year-olds. I don't know about the 10-year-olds.
All good. I mean, in the context of this conversation, anyway, we're talking about Gen Z. So people who are entering the workforce, maybe who are recently or will recently graduate from university, looking for the first career, and then considering an occupation, something to do in the nonprofit industry. So it's all good that we only focus on a certain portion of the Gen Z spectrum.
Absolutely. I'm not like, those second graders aren't working hard enough. Let's talk about the work ethic of in science class. I see them napping. It's not right.
So what's interesting about each generation is they tend to have a unique set of skills, interests, focus areas, desires, motivations, all that kind of good stuff. I was wondering if you could speak broadly to what are we looking at, or what do we when we talk about Gen Z? What are those factors, or how do those factors, how are they associated to Gen Z?
I see a lot of self-preservation in Gen Z in the workforce. I think Gen Z cares a lot more about work-life balance and sustainability and an ethical work environment. I think Gen Z is a lot more alert and hyper aware of toxic work environments and a little bit less likely to get stretched thin. And so that's something we can talk more about. But I see that a lot with the nonprofit sector is I feel like in terms of negative associations with the nonprofit sector, there's a lot of talk about burnout and long hours, low pay for the mission, and maybe even in worst case scenarios, some emotional manipulation. And I think that's something that Gen Z is very repelled by. So I'm really interested to see how, as more and more Gen Z people enter the workforce, I'm interested to see how that is going to affect the nonprofit sector.
The fact that they're looking more for a work-life balance suggests, at least initially to me, that a nonprofit career is interesting because, yes, there are maybe longer. I'm not sure there are longer hours. The general sense, and I'm obviously really generalizing here,
Yes.
but after working in the nonprofit industry for myself for quite a few years, I've noticed that the work-life balance seems to be better than the corporate. The corporate side seems to be always about go, 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 making money,
Mm,
focusing on shareholder value, versus the nonprofit world, it's more about the mission, the people. So I don't know if you're actually doing fewer or more hours, but it definitely feels like fewer hours because maybe the motivation behind why you're working is a bit different. And I was curious to see that, or if you agree with, there is a, I would get the impression that, or I have the impression that Gen Zs might be interested in a nonprofit career because of that balance seems to be a bit more in favor of work life versus, go, go, go all the time.
yes, I definitely see that, especially in comparison to, say, investment banking or some more intense corporate career paths. But at the same time, there are definitely other paths that do provide more PTO or higher benefits than, say, an entry-level nonprofit role. And I think that really is where you do see the squeeze is with the entry-level nonprofit roles. I think once you're more established, there's probably more freedom, but as Gen Z entering the workforce, it's likely going to be an entry-level role. And I think there's a funny series on TikTok called The Nonprofit Boss. I can send it to you after this. And it's kind of playing on the fact that there are like very established, higher up, more financially stable executives in the nonprofit world. And it's kind of playing on like how much they expect from entry level employees in the nonprofit world who are making, say, $40,000 a year, maybe even less. And they're like, you're gonna run the show. You know what I mean? It's not everywhere, but it's definitely something that happens. And I think it's easier to kind of get coerced in the nonprofit world because of the mission thing. It's very easy to be like, well, I love the mission. I love the mission. And I was talking at a recent nonprofit meetup to some nonprofit professionals who are Gen Z, and they're like, I have sacrificed so much for this mission that I'm starting to almost resent the mission, which is crazy because obviously you got into the work because you love the mission. But once you give so much of yourself, eventually you just feel kind of burnt out, you know?
I, based on my experience, based on people I've talked to, I think the general consensus is every organization, to some measure, is going to try to squeeze as much as they can from new people, right? Especially entry
Yeah.
level people. I mean, let's say on the corporate side, there's definitely a motivation to get them to work as much as possible for as little pay as possible. I'm hoping that's not always the case with nonprofits, that there's a bit more of a balance, but I still understand the mental state behind it, in that, generally young people are motivated, they're enthusiastic, they want to be there, and therefore they might tolerate being paid a bit less than maybe they should be paid just because, you know, of that enthusiasm.
Yes.
I'm hoping the nonprofit industry is not so much there, but I can imagine it still lingers and persists even in that industry. So how does, like, is it, would you say it's just a matter of being informed on the Gen Z side to prevent that from happening, not to make sure that they don't, to make sure that they don't get overwhelmed with their work and lose track and lose faith and lose motivation in the mission, or is it something else?
First of all, I completely agree with you. And I will say that there are so many nonprofits that are treating their employees incredibly. So this isn't everywhere. It's just, kind of the bad apples, you could say. I think it's something for Gen Z to be aware of, and I think Gen Z is aware of it. So I'm not too worried about them in that regard. I think that if anything, conditions are going to get better because of the awareness. But I do think it's interesting in 2025 with the technology that we have so much flexibility. And so it's going to be interesting to also see people who want to pursue a mission and want to elevate a specific cause, they now have more options to do that. It's not necessarily, okay, go get this entry level role at a nonprofit. It could also be freelancing and doing consultant work. So that's also an interesting path to consider, the fact that we now have more options than anyone ever did 20 years ago. And I think that in itself is also going to help make the conditions a little bit better because organizations are going to be aware that it's frankly easier for people to leave and go off and do their own thing. So if if organizations aren't treating their employees well, there's more of a risk around that.
I definitely want to talk about freelancing, but before we get there, I'm curious because the sense also I have, and these are all a large amount of what I'm going to say today is based on just personal experience and feelings. So forgive me if I'm a bit off. But I get the impression that Gen Z seems to be more connected as a generation than ever before in the sense of they communicate more with each other or they're more in tune and they pay attention more to the news or pay attention to what's happening in the world around them because of the social media and because of technology. So if there's a moment where they feel that they're not like they're getting stretched thin to your point earlier, they're doing the long hours, lower pay, I get the sense that they would be able to figure that out, not just based on their own impressions, but also asking around and getting other people's feedback to decide whether they actually are or not. Like, would you say that's kind of true? Like, how would they, is there any particular approach or method that you find Gen Z takes to start realizing that maybe working at a nonprofit as a low entry level employee is not the best fit for them and that they're I don't know if their patience level is shorter or their tolerance is shorter. And at some point, they just might say, this isn't working for me. I'm out of here.
Absolutely. There are so many methods of connection, whether it's TikTok or Reddit or Instagram. There are a lot of ways to voice what you're experiencing and see whether it's normal. And back to the TikTok skit that I was mentioning earlier, that kind of plays on the exploitative nature of some nonprofit organizations. I think that seeing skits like that makes you realize, oh, whoa, that exact line has been used on me. That exact line of you can't have PTO, but you could volunteer this weekend if you want a new experience. Silly things like that. It's funny, but it also does make you realize, oh, wow, I've actually heard that exact line. And here everyone is talking about how everyone who's ever used that line on them has been kind of toxic. Maybe the person who used that line on me was being kind of playing into coercion a little bit, you know? So again, that's more so me talking about like the negative side of things. So sorry to dive so deep into the bad part. I do obviously love the nonprofit sector. That's why I'm here. But I think that it is easier to also catch on to some of the red flags in certain organizations. And I'm sure that this also does apply to the for-profit sector. It's just I don't have quite as much experience with that because I've never really worked in a corporate setting or anything like that. So I can't speak on that.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
I definitely get the sense that at least they feel, Gen Z feels that they have more options. Whether they actually have more options or not can be discussed. But the idea is that the feeling is that the more options, if they're not happy with what they're doing or where they are at, to your point, they can always say, or they can often say, freelancing might be a better fit for me. I'll be my own boss, find my own way. I'm curious to know if you have any advice for people who are, and considering doing that freelancing, because it's one thing to glamorize and the ability to choose your own destiny, but it's always not as simple, or often not as simple as just finding that path and then being successful right away. Are there any kind of um, maybe initial decision things to consider before making the decision of becoming freelance, and other ways to become more successful being a freelancer as a Gen Z?
That is a great question. I mean, one of the downsides to being a freelancer is you never clock out. You don't get PTO or health benefits. There's definitely a lot of challenges. And you have to be very self-motivated because no one else is going to be really pushing for your success. If you're a team of one, it's really you. You got to do everything. You got to do the marketing, you got to do the sales, you got to do the actual client work. So it's also a lot to balance. And you do need to have a pretty solid network to find success as a freelancer. It takes time to build a network. So if you're graduating from school and the only network you have is maybe a couple professors who like you, some guy you met on the bus one day, I don't know, and you want to launch a business, people don't really have any reason to trust you yet. So that is very difficult. And that is one area where it's like maybe it is better to work a full-time job and make those connections. And that's also where it's important to, this is me talking to Gen Z here. It is important to respect your employer and do your best at any full-time job you work because if you do decide to go off on your own, having those strong connections of people who can vouch for you and say, this person is rooted in integrity, this person is a hard worker, this person, I would recommend them. That's huge. That is really going to help your success as a freelancer. So, yeah, I don't think that everyone I don't think that it's the best path I don't think that it's the best path for everyone to jump straight into freelancing or starting their own business immediately out of college. Having a full-time job in a nonprofit is great because you make a lot of connections and you can gain credibility.
And I would agree because to me, you going to university, for example, yes, you get the education, but it's not just about that. It's actually building the connections. There is truth to the saying, it's not who you are, it's who you know. So the idea of going straight to freelancing is something I would not recommend either. And I do coaching sometimes for people in the nonprofit Salesforce industry. And I think it's important to build a reputation, build some credibility, build your network, working potentially in a full time job. And then after a certain number of years of building your portfolio, building those connections, then you can go on your own because you have the experience, you have the reputation already, at least somewhat of a reputation that you can then expand as a freelancer versus going straight to freelancer. You're probably going to have a hard, not to say you shouldn't, but you're going to have a harder time than if you start with this particular art. That's based on my experience and what the people I've seen.
Absolutely. And if you do want to jump straight into freelancing, I respect the hustle 100%. And one thing that I would very much recommend is if you're still in school or you're not ready to make the leap to freelancing just yet, start posting, especially on LinkedIn, but on any platform really. Start posting about your professional experiences and about the topics that you're interested in and start building relationships online. That is another quick way to, well, I shouldn't say quick way, that is another long-term way to build relationships and gain trust because there's a difference between someone graduating and saying, okay, I want to work for myself and be a freelancer, so pay me to do this service, and you've never heard from them before in your life, versus someone who you know has been passionate about, say, preserving the environment. You've seen them posting about it for 4 years. You know all these little projects they've done. They've talked about the research that they did in class. Trust that person a lot more, and you'd be a lot more likely to say, oh, okay, I can work with this person because I genuinely know that they're passionate about this subject.
There's a general sense that Gen Z are more active on social media. And that can be obviously a very powerful tool when you want to promote the mission, whether you're a soloist or you're working for a nonprofit organization. But there's something I heard some kind of joke about, give it to the Gen Z, they'll know what to do in terms of social media. It's just like it's native to them. It's just part of their fabric of their DNA. Is there any, would you say there's any truth to that? And if so, how can nonprofits leverage that experience that Gen Z brings to be able to promote their mission through social media, whatever it is, whether it's TikTok or any Instagram, whatever the platform is?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we've seen a surgence recently in for-profit companies using social media very creatively, handing it off to some chaotic, unhinged intern who's jumping on every trend and posting funny skits and doing all kinds of creative stuff that you're like, wow, that was bold. 5 years ago, if you told me that IHOP was going to be cracking jokes like this on Twitter, I would have been shocked. And I don't think that the nonprofit sector has really caught on to that wave yet. I don't see nonprofits hopping onto every trend or joking around the way that some of these corporations are. Like, I'll see a funny TikTok, open the comments, and there's six corporations leaving jokes in the comment. And it has nothing to do with their business. It's just them showing up and being funny. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know what I really think about that. I don't really have an opinion on that just yet, but um, it is an interesting thing. And I think nonprofits, the struggle so far has probably been maybe lack of bandwidth, lack of time, and then also feeling like how can we go online and joke around when our mission is so serious? Like, I could easily see how there would be a disconnect and it wouldn't seem super aligned. But there are some cool, creative nonprofit marketers out there that I really enjoy following. It's just interesting to see. I even have had a conversation recently about influencer marketing with nonprofits and bringing in the creator economy into the nonprofit sector. It's just, yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know, I don't have any solid answers on that, but they're all very interesting conversations to me.
Hey, Alex here. I want to take a brief moment and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, please consider sharing it with someone who would also benefit from its insights. It's these kinds of referrals that really help the show grow. You can also show your support by making a small donation. I don't do corporate sponsorships or product placements, so I rely on your support to keep the show going. You can visit my website, agentsofnonprofit.com, and click Support Us in the top menu. Thank you kindly.
This is another broad, general question, but do you see any other strengths that Gen Z can bring to the table that might not be as apparent on previous generations?
I think social media is a huge one. Web design is big. AI things, anything technical, Gen Z is pretty good at. Again, generalization, not everyone, but being more socially savvy with the times, trends, all that kind of stuff. A fresher perspective on maybe your mission. If someone's been working in the nonprofit for 30 years, they're so deep in it, they don't even realize that they're using industry jargon, or they don't even realize that the average person doesn't know some of the words that they're using in their copy. So having that fresh perspective of someone like starting from ground zero can be really helpful. And then of course with Gen Z's values around like work-life balance and ethical work cultures, I think all of those things can bring a unique, valuable perspective to company culture.
There's definitely a benefit to bringing in what I call fresh meat or fresh blood. I'm not sure why these expressions exist. They're pretty barbaric, but the idea of having new insights, right? Someone new to the table that has fresh eyes, fresh perspective, whether it's Gen Z or not, it's always a good idea to keep the nonprofit fresh and revitalize so that you don't get too stuck in your ways, too echo chamber type of style where you're just focusing on a small subset of what you could be focusing on. So social media for sure, I think is a great addition, and just the ability for non-Gen Zs to be able to offer that. I was hoping maybe you could add one more to it besides just the bringing in new people altogether and the social media stuff. Is there anything else that there's, because one thing I'm thinking of, I was wondering if you were thinking of the same thing.
Oh gosh, I wonder what you're thinking of. I don't know. I don't know. There's definitely more. It's hard to think off the top of my head though. What are you thinking of?
In general, it's just technology. I think Gen Z
Yeah.
in general is just I'm not sure the expression works, but I mean they just have technology under their thumb. It's just they're brought up in the world of technology. They've never seen a world without technology, and so solving any kind of issue, the impression I get is, how can technology solve it versus how can whatever other mechanism solves it. And I'm lucky enough, of course, I'm a tech guy, so I lean to technology pretty quickly. But I get the impression, at least, that Gen Z is just, it's an innate, it's part of their fabric of saying, how can we solve this either through AI or through some kind of automation or some kind of process or some other tech-oriented approach.
Absolutely. I mean, we've grown up surrounded by algorithms. We've literally grown up in the algorithm. It's hard for me to even imagine a life that wasn't impacted by algorithms. I think I got my first iPod when I was in like fifth grade, the iPod Touch that had like Angry Birds and all that stuff. And then Instagram. I remember I didn't even know that Instagram was public and I was posting pictures of the most random stuff because I thought it was like a camera roll. And then I found out it was public because my friends were like, you posted a picture of dolls. Do you still play with dolls? This was in fifth grade, and I was like, oh, it's public. Cool, 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 cool. So you learn fast. You learn fast.
You also mentioned in a pre-conversation about potentially offering a seat at the board of directors for Gen Z, and I'm curious to get first of all, let's set that up first before I start challenging
Okay.
you. But what was your impression? Like, what was your the reasoning why it would be at least a potentially good idea to have a Gen Z on the board of directors?
Because I think Gen Z brings such a unique perspective with the tech, with the awareness of pop culture, and just generally a fresh perspective that's not only new to the nonprofit, but new to the entire career world. I think Gen Z has a perspective that's very modern and sharp and agile. And it just can be such a beneficial thing for people who don't have that perspective. Like if I'm sitting in a boardroom and there's 12 people who are all over 60 and they're stressing out about what the perfect copy for something is, and I'm like, they don't know that they can actually just ask ChatGPT which of these 10 variants do you think would be best for our organization? They wouldn't even think to plug it into ChatGPT. Half of them have maybe even never used it, which is fine, but it's nice to have Gen Z in the room who can be like, hey guys, I have a really quick fix here. Give me about 30 seconds and we can come to a consensus on this.
So my take is for sure again early as I spoke to earlier, having fresh perspective on things is important and it's needed. It's not even important, it's needed. You don't want to become stale as an organization. You do want to keep up with the times. Um, but for me, the board of directors is you have them because of the experience that they bring to the table, right? We want someone who has experience in finance, someone who's good in marketing, someone who's good in technology. To have someone brand new to the working world as a board of directors, to me seems at least initially counterintuitive. So I'm pushing back a bit to see if you can convince me that again,
Yeah,
having the voice there somewhere is important. It's just
right.
where the voice should be positioned. And to me, I'm not sure whether it should be at the board of direct levels, but maybe they should. Maybe that this would be a good idea for the reasons that you were mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, but I think in terms of each person on the board bringing unique experience, I think being Gen Z is a unique experience. And sure, they might not have 30 years of experience working in the industry, but they do have a unique experience of having an iPhone as a toddler. You know what I mean? Um, so I'm not saying that 50% of the board should be Gen Z. I just think that there should be one seat on every board for Gen Z. And I wish that I could articulate the value of that a little bit better, but I just think that every time that it is implemented, you can see the benefits so quickly. I really do feel like every board that I've ever sat on, every board meeting that I've ever sat in on, has been like, oh, you're so sharp. It's so crazy to watch how fast you type. It's so crazy to watch you just pull up a Canva document as we're all stressing about who's going to make the flyer. And 30 seconds later, there's the flyer. You know what I mean? So, uh, I think the value will show itself. It's something that organizations could at least try out. Let a Gen Z sit in on your board meeting. If they contribute really well and they bring a lot of value, then maybe you might consider bringing them onto the board in a more serious capacity. But it's also valuable for the Gen Z if there's a young person that wants to get involved with your organization. Engaging that person is good for both you and that young person because they're becoming more emotionally invested in your nonprofit. They're learning from leaders, they're learning what the board's priorities are and what their values are. I think it's frustrating for a lot of people at the entry level to hear this decision was made by the board. No explanation, no follow up. No, you can't talk to them. They're important, they're busy. It's way above your head, it's way above your pay grade. And there's this great distance and separation that can lead to a lot of feelings of unease. Versus if there is a person that's young that's like, oh no, I talked to the board. Dave, yeah, Dave said this because of that. I see where he's coming from. You know, it's kind of like a voice for that group of people, I guess.
We will definitely agree that the board needs to represent who you're serving, right? If you're serving a wide spectrum of people, it's important to have a voice at the table to represent those people, whoever it is, right? So if your board is only older white men, then chances are, if you're serving older white men, maybe it's okay. But if you're serving any other group, you probably want to have a certain amount of diversity to represent who you're actually trying to serve. Yeah, I also appreciate the fact that you said this trial period. This is a great way to introduce people to something new is let's just try it for a little while. Let's bring them to various meetings, board meetings, the Gen Z. And then if they are offering, adding contribution, adding value, then considering adding them as an official capacity is a great way to start and introduce and trial that without, too much risk. So I appreciate you mentioning that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of chambers of commerce have introduced young professionals boards. I don't know if you've noticed that where you are, but in the past couple of cities that I've lived in, there's been young professionals branches of the Chamber of Commerce, and it's really interesting to see how powerful those groups are in the community. When I first got down to St. Petersburg, I went to a St. Petersburg Young Professionals committee meeting, and this older gentleman came in and he was like, I just want to say thank you to this group because you've given hundreds of thousands of volunteer hours and raised so much in donations for the city. You guys have done so much for this community. And that just made me think, wow, how powerful is that? Clearly, there is some value here. None of these people have been working in the space for 30, 40 years. None of them. They're all young, but clearly there's still some very serious impact being had. So I thought that was pretty cool.
There was one other element about Gen Z that I get the sense also that they're able to bring to the table, and that's a sense of branding. I think branding is a very important conversation, whether the individual is a freelancer or working for a nonprofit organization. And the sense is that Gen Z has either a fresh perspective or a modern perspective on how to promote branding and promote and create first, then promote branding. I was curious to know your opinion. Would you say branding now is more important than ever, and why? Or is Gen Z in a good position to champion branding?
Yes, I absolutely think that personal branding is more important now than ever before because very soon here we're going to have more and more products and services being churned out by artificial intelligence. So to be able to stand out in that wave as a personal brand, a human that people trust is going to be huge. And as Gen Z enters the workforce and is more and more interested in transparency, they really value connecting with humans. And that's not just Gen Z, that's gonna really rise across all generations, I think, is going to be this distrust of am I talking to a robot right now? So, being able to have a very strong personal brand where people associate your mission with the human and they trust you and they know that you're being authentic and that all of your content is quality, straight from the heart. You've believed what you believe for a long time. You're not just hopping onto any wave. There's so much value in that, whether you're a freelancer or you're representing an organization. So I know that there's a lot of hesitancy for executive directors to be active on LinkedIn, building personal brands, because there's a lot of pressure when you're representing an organization. There's a lot of pressure from the board and from the public. However, I do think it is in the organization's best interest for their executive directors and their board members to be showing up online as much as possible, advocating for their mission, sharing their personal stories about why they believe what they believe, why they're doing the work that they're doing, and consistently doing that until their face is so tightly associated with the mission that no amount of AI content is going to sway anyone in any direction. They're going to be supporting you guys, they're going to be following you guys, and you'll have their loyalty and respect for years to come.
Yeah, the whole concept of AI is interesting. I had a conversation with my niece, who is actually 12 now, and she has some strong concerns about AI taking over the workforce and more than that. But we'll just talk about the workforce for the moment. And to your point, yeah, I mean there is a lot of content being churned out by AI, which to me is still low quality content and just not the same as someone who's actually human that produces it. So I'm curious to know, how what are your concerns about AI in the workplace and taking over certain jobs and just the impacts in general of AI?
Yes, I am concerned, to be honest. I wish that I could say that I wasn't, but I am. It does make me nervous. I am scared about it. I think that me advocating for personal branding is part of my pushback against AI. This is my human versus robots war. This is me trying to armor up the humans here. But it's hard to say. I mean, we can have our little critiques about AI. First, it was that when it generates images of when it generates images of humans, they only have 4 fingers. That was the thing for a while. Now they certainly have all 5 fingers and they're looking very real. And it's just gonna get better and better, I think. And yeah, it is scary. And I honestly think that the best thing that you can do to protect yourself against it is to build a personal brand. If you're a nonprofit and you're pouring thousands of dollars into making this beautiful film about, say, protecting the ocean, AI can probably make a video that's just as beautiful and compelling in 30 seconds. Maybe not today in August of 2025, but definitely by 2026, I would say we're going to have we're going to we're going to have some really crazy stuff coming out. So, yeah, you might not be able to outdo AI in terms of actual output and production. But again, there's that human to human trust that you can start building now and tap into those networks and those human relationships. I think that's going to be really powerful. That might be our only hope. I don't know.
I pay attention a lot to AI, and even I was watching an article, a podcast on the diary of a CEO. He was interviewing who they call the Godfather of AI, and even he's like uncertain about where things are going in the future. So, no one obviously has a crystal ball, and I agree that trying to be as human as possible is probably your best bet for the short term, at least. We'll see what happens longer term, but being able to identify and promote and to really nourish a personal brand, whether it's personal because you're a nonprofit, working at a nonprofit, or a freelancer. I think branding, you're right, is an important part of distinguishing yourself from the AI content.
Absolutely. It's funny because people love the phrase AI isn't going to replace us, AI is a tool. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that I think we should all be terrified. No, but I do think that that's a bit of an oversimplification. And a lot of people's remedy is to protect yourself, just learn how to use AI. Just learn how to use it. AI is a tool, learn how to use it. First of all, I don't know if this is just a Gen Z perspective, but I kind of feel like, what is there to learn? Like, to me, it's so simple. Talk to ChatGPT. You don't need to learn how to make a custom GPT or do any of this crazy in-depth stuff that I feel like people try to scare you into feeling like you need to know. It's really the basics. And if AI gets that amazingly good, AI is going to be able to teach you how to use AI. So I don't think that people need to immediately get super technical and become coders. That's kind of like the internet coming out and saying, you need to learn how to use the internet. Buy my course to teach you how to code. That didn't turn out to be very necessary. Now we have a million no code solutions. You know what I mean? So I think people could easily get thrown into a loop where they're like, oh, I need to use AI in my business. I need to shape my business around AI. I need to get ahead of this. So instead of being a marketing professional, I'm going to be an AI marketing professional. Instead of being a public relations professional, I'm going to be an AI public relations professional. And they just throw AI into everything because they want to get ahead of it. But again, I don't necessarily think that that's the best course of action. I think the best course of action right now is to lean into your humanity. But that's just my opinion. maybe I'll be proven wrong. I don't know.
There was a period in time a while ago where everything was 3D because 3D printers were a thing. It was novel. And all of a sudden, I mean, I remember toothpaste. It was like 3D toothpaste. Like, what the heck is 3D toothpaste? Definitely AI is thrown around all over the place today. It's definitely not going away. It's definitely just going to get bigger and more encompassing. The impression that I get, and what I would recommend to listeners, is just be familiar with it, be comfortable with it, knowing how to use it, instead of saying, "I don't know what AI is. I don't want to know about it. I'm just going to not, put my head in the sand and ignore it." It's embracing it. It's just spending the time talking to it, understanding what its capabilities are, where its edges are, how you can incorporate certain parts of it into your work stream. Because there's a lot of ways. I mean, I build apps these days, right, for Salesforce, and there are ways that I can use AI to improve the app to make myself an army of one almost. So I don't always have to depend on developers. And whether it's creative or technical, it doesn't really matter. The idea is it's just using it and to become familiar with it, so you're not caught off guard. And when the well, if and when the wave comes to take over all our jobs. But that's basically the most we can hope for at this point. And to your point, I totally agree. Leaning into humanity, leaning into their soft skills, the connection between people, the personal branding, all of that. These are all good things that you can do in the short term.
Yeah, I also recently went to a conference for women in business and they did a panel on AI and they mentioned that around 75% of people who are using ChatGPT on a daily basis are men, and it's even higher for some of the other AIs like Grok. And these I don't want to butcher this, but the way I understand it is these AI tools like ChatGPT and Grok are using the input, what people are saying to them, and using what people say to them to create their knowledge base. So basically, if 75% of the use is by men, their knowledge base is 75% based on a male perspective. So the panel was arguing that we basically need more women and diverse audiences to use these tools so that their knowledge base is more diverse and representative of different types of people. I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know actually how that really works, but that definitely shifted my perspective and made me be a little bit more open to using AI and talking about using AI. The women were saying basically we need more women and other minority people to be on this AI wave just to represent our demographics. I mean, I don't know. I'm not like diving head first into the whole AI thing just because of that, because I know that there are also some environmental concerns, which I don't know a ton about. So I don't know. This is just me sharing my very limited experience and perspective here. But yeah, I'm kind of balancing those two things of like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to use ChatGPT because it needs more of a woman's perspective. But also, I've heard that it's not great for the environment. I don't know what the facts are around that.
So what I could add to the conversation is I think you're right. Diversity is important. If AI is only trained on 60-year-old white male type of perspective, then that's what it's going to chew out. Whether your particular inputs have a big influence on that, I'm not so sure either. I think it's based on the training models that the companies that run the AIs are feeding it. Now, you could have maybe an influence on them. You could say, hey, listen, the answer I'm getting seems to be from one perspective, it's missing other perspectives. And then you can somehow share that back with the organization. But it's really the organization themselves that decides on the perspective that's being offered based again on the training models, not necessarily your individual inputs. So I agree that other people need to, in various groups, need to use AI to be able to not necessarily validate, but just make sure that it's just not one single perspective, that it does encompass the breadth and the colors of the world that we live in, and not just one. But I'm not so sure there are individual inputs. Just typing it into the AI will actually make a difference or not. And then in terms of the environmental stuff, I mean, it's hard to quantify. Yes, there is some measurable amount that if you are using an AI, it does have an impact on the environment. But to stop using it or prevent yourself from using it because of that, I mean, to me, that's just a cost of doing business, and that cost will go down, right? The more people use it, like everything else, once you first start using something, it usually tends to be very expensive, and the more people use it, the cost tends to drive down. So my impression is that that shouldn't prevent you or make you hesitate to actually use it. Just use it, and that part will figure itself out over time.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, it is really interesting to hear you say that. I think with every big innovation that comes to humanity, there's so much potential for it to either become sort of an equalizer and uplift people like a rising tide lifts all boats, but it also has the potential to exasperate current social issues and make those gaps even wider, which is what scares me. And the moment that AI came out, I was like, no, there's too much greed in the world for us to have this much power. But I don't know. I don't know. I hope that it's, the former thing that I said about maybe it can become a rising tide lifts all boats. Maybe it can become an equalizer and something that provides new opportunities to people who wouldn't have access to that to begin with. I'm not sure, but it's something for us all to be aware of, right? It's just something that we need to think about. And yeah, I think encouraging probably some more diverse voices in that field and on that topic is never a bad thing.
In leaning into the superhero theme of this show, I was curious to know if you had some kind of magic wand or a superpower to change something in the Gen Z space, in the nonprofit space, or AI space. Let's throw that one in too. What would it be?
Ooh, hmm. I think it would be fun to see nonprofits loosen up a little bit, for lack of a better term, and let Gen Z come in and spice things up and bring in that eccentric creativity. Let them have fun with it. Let them bring a pop of color into this space. That would be fun for me to see. And then in terms of being good for humanity, I would love to definitely see some more diverse perspectives represented. I'd love to see entry-level employees being treated with a very high level of respect. I want humanity to be first and foremost recognizing each other's dignity and treating each other well. That's my beautiful grand vision for AI, nonprofits, and Gen Z.
Love it. Marika, thank you so much for joining me. I was hoping if you could share ways that people can get in touch with you if they have some follow up questions.
Absolutely. LinkedIn is my number one platform. I'm extremely active on LinkedIn. I respond to absolutely every message I receive. So if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I would be very happy to chat more about any of this because it is really interesting and I love connecting with other people in the nonprofit sector. So LinkedIn is really the way. And it's just my name, Marika Luneau.
Marika, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thank you so much for doing what you do. I love this podcast. I'm becoming a super fan.
I appreciate it. I'm doing my best. All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.